Good day, gentlemen. Dirk here with the MGTOW solution. Today I'm going to talk about the intersection of biology, psychology, and sociology within the context of MGTOW. As a health and fitness guy, I'm interested in things like this, but I think they're important for MGTOW to understand because we're all trying to make our lives better. So here we go. Chapter 4. The biopsychosocial construct. In the field of healthcare, many practitioners are acknowledging that health is not simply biological. An individual's psychological status has a direct impact on their physical health, as does their social support network and environment. This is not an entirely new concept, but it appears to be going mainstream. There's a lot of research coming out to support the notion that things like stress can result in cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure, and may even contribute to cancer. The concept is that you have to consider psychology and sociology when evaluating a person's biological health, and vice versa. It's all interrelated. In the medical world, this is referred to as the biopsychosocial model of medicine. In the United States, I would argue that we don't have a healthcare system. Rather, we have a disease management system. Most of those diseases are the result of poor lifestyle choices. People live completely sedentary lives and eat garbage, but are then surprised when they're diagnosed with diabetes or heart disease. Only then do they think about their health, and even then they look to others to solve the problem for them. They're completely reactive. In addition to such lifestyle errors, people are subject to chronic stress, sleep deprivation, and sensory overload from technology. All of these factors have a profound effect on the health of modern humans. Some of this is unavoidable, but much of it is. Constant use of technology leads to inadequate sleep, leading to systemic inflammation, leading to heart disease. The continuous barrage of advertising and compulsive interactions with smartphones results in people living in a state of continuous partial attention. How many times have you been in a face-to-face conversation with someone only to be interrupted? Wait a minute, I just got a text. Their gadget is more important than the human being standing in front of them. Modern life provides countless advantages, but it has also created some new problems. Fortunately, people have started to figure this out. They're beginning to understand that it's probably a good idea to step away from the technology and go for a walk in the woods once in a while. The main benefit of this is a reduction in psychological stress, leading to a reduction in other health problems. Like this new model of healthcare, interpersonal relations between men and women have biological, psychological, and sociological components. We have different biological instincts and different psychological outlooks, which are influenced by our sociological environments. Those environments are continuously evolving. Life was very different 100 years ago, let alone 1,000. Men and women have always had different roles in society, based mostly on their natural abilities. Generally speaking, men have performed the role of warrior hunters, while women have performed the role of nurturer mothers. This is still true today, though there are many exceptions. But there can be no question that combat is still almost entirely the domain of men, while caring for children is mostly the realm of women. Just compare the gender makeup of an infantry unit to a daycare center. This is because men and women are, in fact, different biologically, psychologically, and socially. Feminists may deny this, but that doesn't change the facts. And it doesn't necessarily mean that one is superior to the other, it's just that our biopsychosocial makeup is not the same. For example, I've known several women over the years that work with autistic children. They all have stories of being bitten, spit on, yelled at, and physically assaulted. These women are angels as far as I'm concerned. I could never do that job. I simply don't have that level of patience. I doubt if I would make it through a single day. Does that make these women superior to me? I don't think so. They just have different psychological qualities. By contrast, working the fishing boats in Alaska is a job that few women excel in due to the physical and environmental demands. We're simply suited for different tasks, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. As far as biology goes, I believe that men are driven by two primary instincts: survival and breeding. Both of these are strong primal instincts that ensure the perpetuation of the species. We're genetically programmed to fuck females so that hopefully our genetics are carried on. We're also programmed to survive as individuals. If you look back to when we were all hunter-gatherers, most of our time was devoted to those two things. We looked for food. We found shelter. If somebody threatened our lives or resources, we killed them. If animals attacked us, we killed them. In between, we sought females. This was the way things were for an extraordinarily long time. All of the modern things we take for granted now are recent developments, as is feminism. But that doesn't change our primal instincts, which remain strong. The reality is, they've hardly changed at all. So what we end up with is we have the primal urge to procreate, but also have a desire to look after our own well-being. Modern society has put these two things in conflict by creating negative consequences for getting involved with females. And while being married might not actually threaten our survival, except in those cases of suicide, it does threaten our well-being. Women are also driven by instincts, the primary one being to find a mate that will ensure her survival and the survival of her offspring. In other words, she wants a man with resources. That used to mean a guy that could hunt and fight and maybe provide shelter. These days it means a guy with money, preferably lots of money. Despite living in the information age, those instincts still explain a lot of our behavior. Pickup artists are simply acting on their instinct to breed. Gold diggers are obviously seeking resources. It's not that different than it was 10,000 years ago, unless you consider the scale of things. It used to be simple. A woman would hook up with a man, and he would provide food, shelter, and protection while she provided sex. This model still exists. Men still want physically attractive women, and women still want men that can provide resources. The difference is that most women don't consider food, shelter, and protection to be adequate resources. They want large houses, luxury cars, diamonds, and a never-ending supply of status symbols. MGTOW is at least partly a result of women exploiting men's resources to the point where it's simply not in the man's best interest to continue providing them. We were never intended to expend all of our resources to gain access to a woman. So, many of us have decided instead to provide none of them. Back in the day, if a woman had a mate who provided her with food, shelter, and protection, that was enough. If she didn't like it, she could get the fuck out of the cave and see how she does on her own. But now, the demands are endless, and the male can never work hard enough or do enough to keep a woman happy. If he does throw her out, he'll probably have to actually pay her just to get her out of his life. So maybe we go our own way. That's great, and it improves our survival well-being situation, but we still have that other pesky instinct telling us to go find a vagina. This is the MGTOW paradox. We still want to get laid, but don't want to make the extreme sacrifices modern women are demanding in order to do so. I think the turning point for a lot of men is reached when they get to a place where their survival, or resources, become more important than vagina access. It's really just a question of how much are you willing to put up with for sex? What price are you willing to pay? What's an acceptable level of risk? You don't have to sacrifice decades of your life by getting married just because you hooked up with a hot chick and think you're going to get a fucker every day for the rest of your life. You're not. It doesn't work that way. Once she has your resources locked in, sex will become increasingly infrequent. Just ask any man who's been married for any length of time. Besides, show me a beautiful woman, and I'll show you a guy who's tired of fucking her. Your biological instincts have a direct impact on your psychological outlook, and your breeding instincts aren't going to go away just because you've gone MGTOW. In fact, this is probably the biggest challenge that men face. So you need to remember your survival instincts the next time you're thinking, I have to fuck that chick no matter what. No, you don't. Think it through. Is she really going to be worth it? Female psychology is much more complex, not because women are more sophisticated, but because they're driven by emotions more than men are. Much more. Many women consider this as evidence of their superiority. They claim to have more of what has become known as emotional intelligence, a ridiculous term intended to equate emotions with intelligence. But emotions and intelligence are two completely different things, which should be obvious to anyone with a reasonable level of actual intelligence. It's quite a stretch, to say the least. Verbal gymnastics. I mean, we don't hear jocks bragging about physical intelligence. Given the emotional dominant nature of women, it should surprise no one that they are far better at manipulation than men are. Maybe we should call this manipulative intelligence. Manipulation, after all, is about changing another person's behavior by arousing emotions in them. A good example is the woman who praises and compliments her man excessively, not because she feels genuine respect for him, but because she's trying to convince him that she's nice to have around, appealing to his ego in the belief that this will make her appear more desirable. The flip side to that example is in questioning his masculinity rather than reinforcing it. If a man falls short of a woman's expectations, usually by failing to perform some desired behavior, then she may question his masculinity. This is a common and surprisingly effective tactic. Be a man and go ask for that raise. Put in those terms, if he doesn't ask for the raise, this proves he's not a man. We've all seen this. But it's not always so obvious. She may opt to be subtle to the point that the man doesn't recognize he's being manipulated. Women are extremely good at this. It seems intuitive for them. Even stupid chicks can do it. To illustrate, if a man doesn't make enough money for her tastes, she may point to her girlfriend's husband as an example. Mike just bought her a new car. What a great guy, don't you think? She won't actually say it, but will imply that Mike is the better man. This is intended to result in a push to earn more money so as not to appear inferior to another male, in this case, Mike. The woman comes off as simply complimenting a friend, but her motivation is entirely self-serving. She too wants more resources. Women commonly portray themselves as complex in order to excuse their own irrationality. When a guy doesn't understand what she's doing or talking about, it's because she's too complex for a mere male to understand. This puts the problem on the man's shoulders. If he had the fabled intuition that women supposedly possess, then perhaps he could grasp the subtleties. We hear meaningless phrases such as feminine mystique and women's intuition all the time to gloss over all manner of inconsistencies and flat-out bizarre behavior. And when she changes her mind about something for no apparent reason, well, that's a woman's prerogative. Men have no such prerogative. Of course, there are other terms more associated with men. My gut instinct, for example, tells me that all this feminine mystique stuff is bullshit and that women are simply irrational, unreliable, and flighty. They've proven this to me over and over again. Yet we are told we just don't understand. I'm going to go with my gut on this one. The sociological aspects are equally relevant. In this age of political correctness, entitlement, and victimhood, it appears that Western society is beginning to implode on itself. Things have gone to ridiculous extremes, and hypocrisy, it appears, knows no bounds. We have social justice warriors embracing the jihadists that have vowed to kill them, while loathing the soldiers who have vowed to protect them from this threat. Immigrants arriving and hating the country that took them in. Career welfare cases crying about injustice despite not having to work for a living. Attacks on the First and Second Amendments to the Constitution. Social experimentation in a military whose mission is to break things and blow shit up. Safe spaces and puppy dogs for college students with hurt feelings. The very concept of being triggered. The prevailing attitude seems to be, ask what your country can do for you. You may have gathered that I'm not a socialist, and you'd be correct. I live in the real world and understand that lofty ideas mean nothing if you don't have the means to pay for them. We can draw some correlations between socialism and feminine thinking. Socialists will say shit like, all Americans should have free health care. Of course, this sounds great until you ask who's going to pay for it. Nothing's truly free. Free health care simply means that somebody else paid for it. Yet socialists insist on pursuing this pipe dream despite the reality of economics. Women will say shit like, I should have a nice house and a new car. Just because you feel you should doesn't mean you can. Does being an attractive female entitle you to that? The answer is no, in case any women are listening. Maybe you can only afford a decent house and an older car. Your idea of should might not match up with reality. When asking the question, who's going to pay for it? The answer for both socialists and women is someone else. For socialists, that someone else is hardworking taxpayers. For women, the someone else is men. This explains why females appear much more open to socialism than men, just like welfare recipients are more open to it than those of us working for a living. Conversely, men going their own way also tend to pay their own way. While we can't possibly hope to solve the socialism problem here, the solution to the problem with women is simple and should be obvious at this point. Don't be an ATM for them. Women are extremely expensive and offer little of real value. They're like diamonds, nice to look at, but definitely not worth the exorbitant cost. Taking this simple step will save you a fortune over time. I'm no financial advisor, but I'll bet this advice provides far greater returns than any advice from a financial professional. In fact, this gives me an idea for a business. I could offer a solution that'll save thousands, possibly millions of dollars. It's easy to implement, has no upfront costs, and will begin increasing your net worth immediately. When people send me a payment for this secret to financial freedom, I'll just send them an email that says, "Stop spending money on women." I'm fully aware of the fact that if enough men did this, it could lead to higher taxes. I mean, who's going to pay for the women if men refuse? The state, through taxes, paid mostly by men. But a moderate tax increase, while wrong, would still likely be much cheaper than actually having a woman in your life. Just do the math. How much would you spend on her even if you never lived together? If you did move in together, how much more would that cost you every month? If you did the unthinkable and got married, what would that cost you compared to living life on your own? Just to be thorough, estimate what a divorce would cost you, given that this is the most common outcome of marriage. Figure it out over years so you get a total cost of ownership. If she's really hot, double your estimate. Whatever you came up with, you can pocket that money. Most guys probably have no clue how much having a woman is costing them. It starts with a $10 drink from the get-go, and it only goes up from there. Any way you look at it, Women are a bad idea from a financial perspective. The only way most guys can afford one is to work in the highest paying job they can get, and those jobs are often far less enjoyable than lower paying jobs. But this is exactly what most guys do. Of course, financial stress affects your health, which brings us back to the psychological and biological aspects. And the financial stress will be compounded by high-stress work routines carried out for years. This takes a definite toll. Men become worn down, physically and mentally. You end up developing a dad bod. Women claim to like dad bods, and that may be true, but not because they find them sexy. It's because having such a physique means you're doing everything you're expected to do, namely working so much that you don't have the time or energy to take care of yourself. Plus, if you're fat, you'll have fewer options and so will be less likely to leave her. But sexually, she'd still prefer a guy like Chad with a six-pack. It doesn't have to be this way. Let's look at an alternative. Suppose you work in a difficult job. But what if, instead of coming home to even more demands, you could come home and chill out every day? Have some peace and quiet. Maybe hit the gym or go for a run to shake off some of that stress. Go to bed early if you'd like, or stay up to watch a movie. That's MGTOW. You'd be better prepared for the following day, don't you think? Or would you be better off spending 4 to 5 hours after a full day's work catering to someone else's needs and maybe enduring a bit of nagging? That's marriage. I suspect that much of the stress in men's lives isn't due to work itself, but from the lack of time to decompress from it when the workday is done. Men are resilient and capable of incredible workloads, but when you move from one stressful environment to another, with no time to yourself, it's a recipe for disaster, health-wise. You simply can't spend every waking moment performing to someone else's expectations, whether it's your boss or your spouse. At least, you can't do so indefinitely, not without consequences. Having time to oneself, having peace and quiet, and having a sense of control over your own life are common themes in the MGTOW community. Guys say things like, "It's so nice not having that constant babbling in the background." "No more screeching harpy." "I feel like I can breathe again." "I no longer feel like an intruder in my own house." "I love being able to do whatever I want without being judged or tasked with something else." Statements like this are the norm. We don't have to deal with the unpredictability that's so common when living with women, wondering what the evening will be like as we drive home from a hard day's work. Many men describe getting home after a positive, productive day on the job only to be greeted by an angry woman. Invariably, she's angry over something the man did or didn't do. Or she just wants to hand off some problem she's incapable of handling herself. Either way, she ends up either making a good day bad or a bad day worse. Living that way is entirely optional. The reduction of stress in the home, your home, by going your own way will enable you to deal with any stress on the job, leading to better psychological and physical health. Your social needs are better met through other people as opposed to having a full-time supervisor at home. In short, all aspects of your life are likely to improve when you're not answering to anyone but yourself, at least outside of work. It really is a much better way to go. And that concludes Chapter 4. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.